My name is Max David, and I'm here to argue that it is necessary for drug companies to test on animals. This is due to the fact that animals make better test subjects, they produce more accurate and more overall information, and they are also better on a genetic scale. My first point was that the animals are providing more accurate information. The humans provide more information because no two humans live the same life. All humans that live in different places, they eat different foods, have different exercise levels. So that means they're exposed to many different things, which creates many variables. Now, the first thing that scientists are taught when they start conducting lab experiments is to standardize all variables except the ones they want to test. Now, let's say the person is exposed to a toxin, and they go to the doctor and say, hey, look, I'm sick, I had a rash, and I had X, Y, and Z. Now, the doctor might attribute this to the drug that the person is being tested on him, the original sickness he has already, or he might attribute to the toxin, but that's not very likely because he won't even know that the person is exposed to the toxin to begin. And that's called the human variation. Just because they don't live the same lives, they produce more variables. And with animals, all those variables are standardized except for the drug. This would be the food that they're fed, the cages that they live in, the bedding that they sleep on. My second point is that animals also produce more information and more accurate information. The reason for that is because they are in enclosed areas and they are more easily monitored. The doctors can measure the metabolic rate, the calorie intake, and the waste output. This is hard to do in human because they're out in the world and they're not going to measure everything accurately themselves. The last reason is that the animals are genetically more viable. The reason they are more genetically viable is because they reproduce on a much larger scale in a much shorter time. This allows for something called transgenics. Transgenics is an artificial transfer of genes. This is how scientists currently infect the animals with the disease they're trying to treat. They do this so that they can then see which part of the DNA specifically causes the problems. And then they can start removing the individual strand. Once they find the strand that is needed, they can then start trying to make a drug that will target that specific part of the DNA. Once they do that, they can start seeing the other effects, such as what can happen during the reproduction cycle. A lot of drugs have side effects on reproduction and on offspring. Now, because the animals reproduce on such a large scale, the genetic problems will come up more often just because there are more numbers. And then from there, they can also try to figure out what specifically in the drug is causing this one problem. And then from there, they can edit the drug slightly or completely start anew if there is too much of a problem. Dr. Lewis Hughes, on his study for sickle cell anemia, which is the cells start to take on a shape they're not supposed to, and they're no longer able to transfer the oxygen needed. Because of transgenics, he also learned that it starts transferring nitric oxide at a much higher scale. He's not entirely sure why this has happened. He just knows that it has happened because of the sickle cell anemia. Because when he removes the anemia, the nitric oxide content in the blood decreases. And the animals are also taken much better care of than the humans. It is mandatory for a vet to be on premises or on call 24/7, according to the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. That is a legal requirement. And so if the animal gets sick, the doctor can come right away and figure everything that's wrong. That's not always going to be an option with humans because they're not going to always be able to get to the doctor, and they're not always going to want to go to the doctor. They may be too busy or simply too lazy to get there. In conclusion, I believe it is necessary for drug companies to test on animals because that they do provide the better information, the more accurate information, and more information.
Right, the proposition is very clearly stated. Your secondary structure is labeled adequately. I think you need to develop a little bit more about what's controversial about doing the animal research. The idea of variables between human beings is a problem with doing research on humans, I think, is an interesting one, but there's no quantification about how important that is in doing the research. The first piece of information that we get from an authority on this particular subject is in the third point. So you are basically explaining a concept which I think sounds like a very reasonable concept, but you're not offering much proof on it. Are there any examples, for instance, of studies that were contaminated because of human activity outside of the laboratory where we got the false results? The closest we come to something like that is the hypothetical about somebody assuming it's a toxic reaction to the medication if somebody gets sick. And that's it. And it's a hypothetical only. It's not an illustration of an actual point. On the third point, you did cite some authorities about why having the animals covered and protected is important, or that there are rules and guidelines on that. Again, I think this is designed to show how the uniformity of the treatment of the animals is necessary to advance the research. And I didn't really get much, that seems to be taken as a presupposition instead of something that has been demonstrated in your argument, and that's a little bit problematic. You need to project your voice a little bit more. At the beginning of the speech, I thought you were rushing. I think you did a better job as you went along in the presentation. All right, thank you.